everybody, welcome to The World This Week. The Middle East is dominating world news once again. Shock in the U.S. after the execution of American journalist Michael Foley by ISIS terrorists. The United States is contemplating wider attacks on ISIS, including in Syria. Can Syrian dictator and mass murderer Assad become a partner? European leaders are concerned with ISIS and call for action. And Hamas keeps firing rockets at Israel while Israel systematically assassinates its commanders. With us this Sunday to discuss all of this are Dani AYALON, former Israeli ambassador to Washington and deputy foreign minister, and Barbara Opall, Rome, Defense News Bureau chief in Israel. Barbara, who would have thought that this thing in Gaza still goes on and it's not even major headlines from the Middle East?
Yes, very few would have ever imagined that we would be now in day 48 with no apparent end in sight. Including Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, the defense minister, and the chief of staff. This is the longest single operation in Israeli history. The government has not yet declared it a war, but this is the longest, second only to Israel's war of independence. And Jacob, it's important to note, Israel is not set up to deal with protracted war of attrition, especially against this asymmetric enemy entrenched among civilians that has this capacity to keep pummeling the Israeli home front. Israel's doctrine, its operational concept is all about short, high-intensity combat with decisive enough results to bring the other side clamoring for a ceasefire. And in this situation, it's entirely the opposite. Israel has agreed to 11 failed ceasefires, and still Hamas is holding firm to these hallucinatory demands. Who would have thought? Right.
Ambassador AYALON, there's confusion within Israel.
Well, I think that we are victims of our own success. I think the protracted campaign is only because the success of Iron Dome. Without Iron Dome, we would have been long ago in Gaza, and with much more cost of lives to the Gazans and also to the IDF. So yes, we are in a attrition war, but I think Israel has the upper hand because the more it goes on, the Hamas is losing. It's losing politically and it's losing militarily, certainly economically. So at the end of the day, what I understand is from the AYALON, Gantz, and the Prime Minister and the Chief of Staff and the Ministry of Defense policy is to really have the Hamas break apart first, and I think this may be going on.
Now, look what's happening. Both the United States and Israel are bombing Islamic terrorist groups. What's the difference?
Well, the difference is that with the ISIS, nobody negotiates, and with Hamas,
everybody negotiates.
Exactly. So this is the difference. This is, I would say, the oxymoron. This is the contradiction in terms that when Prime Minister Netanyahu says Hamas is ISIS, but at the same time, he sends his negotiators to Cairo to talk to them, albeit indirectly. That makes the difference, and this is why people do not see them in the same kind of yardstick.
Barbara, do you see any difference or none?
I have to take a slight exception to what Danny said, in that when the Prime Minister says Hamas is ISIS, ISIS is Hamas, there are great distinctions in ideology and in their strategy. Hamas does not aspire to turn the whole Middle East, the whole Levant, into a caliphate. But when we see these images of this brutal beheading by James Foley, the American journalist, and then these images coming out over the past 24 hours of Palestinians on their knees being publicly executed by masked Hamas men, it doesn't matter the distinctions. In the public's eye, Netanyahu is being, I think, rather successful in drawing a parallel between Hamas and ISIS.
This ISIS crisis takes the pressure off of Israel?
Yes, especially after the Hamas lost their nerves following the assassination of their leaders and started executing their own people, which had nothing to do with us, by the way. They were not in any way connected to us, but the way that they were just killing indiscriminately 21 people as their flocks got out of the mosques. Also, I think in terms of the impression, is making them much closer to ISIS in the world's opinion. And I agree with Barbara, but it doesn't matter if the ideologies are changing, are different, or if their methods of operations. What's most important is the perception in the world's opinion. And I think the Prime Minister is right to make them two peas in a pod, as two branches of the same tree. This is important in our psychological, in our political campaign also against Hamas.
Yeah, Barbara, we haven't heard from President Obama in a while, but bombing in Gaza, the bombings are still going on. So is this another test for Obama?
Obama has to step up to the plate in Syria, in Iraq, against ISIS. He's going to dally more. He does have he is empowered by Congress to continue airstrikes until October. And the mood in Congress, believe it or not, is very, very much in favor of some more decisive action in Iraq and Syria. I don't think that Obama will extend beyond his mandate of airstrikes. The Pentagon is weary. They are very unlikely to send in ground troops. But yes, this is a test for Obama. And yes, the first part of your question is that it does deflect attention on Israel and Hamas. And unless something horrific happens with an errant Israeli bomb on a hospital, which is increasingly likely these days, or some type of atrocity from Hamas to Israel, like this 4-year-old child who was killed by shrapnel from the mortars, unless it gets really out of hand, the world is going to just leave this conflict to fester, and the focus is increasingly on what's happening in Iraq and Syria.
Prime Minister Netanyahu kept saying that there are new opportunities in the Middle East after the fire subsides, maybe. Do you believe him?
I believe him only if he will take the initiative, because if he just keeps it on paper, nothing will happen. But yes, there are opportunities, because certainly the most powerful now forces in the institutioned world, Arab world, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Egypt, and I would say behind is Abu Mazen and Jordan, they certainly see eye to eye with us vis-a-vis Iran, vis-a-vis Hamas, vis-a-vis ISIS. So certainly there could be a new page, but Israel will have to pay. And the payment that Israel will have to put on the table is acceptance of the Saudi initiative as a concept, not taking everything as a dictate, but at least as a basis for negotiation.
Remains to be seen. Ambassador AYALON, Barbara Opall, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Ebola virus keeps spreading in Africa, and the rest of the world is terrified as well. With us now is Dr. Prof.Loebel, one of the world's leading researchers of the Ebola. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Actually coming straight from Africa, right?
Yes, absolutely. Just yesterday I arrived.
Where from?
Uganda.
Uganda. Well, how was it there?
It's peaceful, but it's difficult being there, and it's a very underdeveloped country. A lot of infectious diseases, but it's a petri dish of the world, as we say.
Yeah. Well, let's first of all understand what is Ebola and how bad is it?
Well, Ebola is a highly deadly virus, up to 90% fatal, and the current strain in West Africa is one of the most lethal strains. And it's had outbreaks over the past, since 1976, through Africa, but mostly in Central Africa. Currently, we're seeing an outbreak in Western Africa. Which is actually alarming, because it's moving further and further from its natural ecology. And that, I think, is a very scary thing.
Where is it going to?
Well, that's a good question. With global warming, it could be going eventually to developed countries, and I think that's why people are so alarmed now about the current outbreak.
What can we do about it?
Well, with the current outbreak, it's really too late for drugs or vaccines, although they're in the pipeline. Right now, strict quarantine, strict closure of borders, control of populations is the only way to go. And eventually this outbreak will burn itself out in West Africa or throughout Africa. It's probably moving now toward the east, and that's why we're concerned, but it will burn itself out.
Well, let's talk about your specific research, which, according to what I understand, you are trying to find some sort of a natural immunization for dealing with Ebola. Explain.
Well, it's not strictly an immunization, but Dr. Victoria Velsky and I have been working for 12 years in Uganda, working with survivors. Actually, many of the outbreaks of Ebola have been in Uganda, DRC Congo. And we're working in that area. What we've been doing is studying people who survived, studying their immune systems, trying to identify those with the strongest immunity to Ebola, isolate the molecules in their blood, which we call the gold in their blood, that enable them to survive this virus, and produce it in our laboratory and to give back as a treatment and what we call a passive vaccine.
Those are the lucky few, like the 10%.
Exactly. Which is, interestingly, we think they're the blessed people, but in Africa, they're the cursed people. So it's...
Any success so far?
Yes, we actually have, well, we have many years of research. We have monoclonal antibodies in our laboratory that do neutralize virus, and these are from humans. They were naturally optimized in a human body. And we're hoping to get them into animal studies before the end of the year, and then move on to hopefully produce a product.
But I understand from you that this is long-term, maybe even long shot, but currently you need to do something else.
Right now, that's, I would say we can have a product in 3 to 5 years. And we're working with the U.S. military on this. There's tremendous effort going on. In fact, we're part of the consortium that produced the drug for the current outbreak, which there's not really enough of. But for the current outbreak, right, there is no other option than quarantine and strict population control.
How many people are dying?
Well, right now it's been over 1,000. I would say before this burns out, there'll probably be a couple of thousand dead.
And, well,
maybe a few.
Tell me a little bit about the process. What's happening when somebody acquires Ebola?
Well, when somebody gets infected, first of all, it should be clear that it's not an airborne virus like influenza or smallpox. So in that case, in that regard, I should say we're somewhat lucky. However, so getting infected, you need close contact. Once somebody's infected, it takes about 10 days. That's called the incubation period. And then the first symptoms are very influenza-like. Then after a few days, the bleeding starts. And essentially, a person dies from bleeding out. You have total circulatory failure, and you have bleeding throughout your body, into your skin, all your orifices, as we say.
Well, yeah.
It's a horrible death.
It is, and we wish you success in your endeavors here and there and research. Thank you very much, Dr. Leslie Loebel, for coming.
Thank you very much.
And finally, this week, we say hello to Israeli track athlete Donald Sanford. Hello, welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
All right. You're doing well. You've just won a medal on a European Championship, 400 meters. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That actually makes you one of Israel's best athletes ever. You know that, right?
Kind of crazy when you think about it like that, yeah.
Well, tell me, how do you practice here in Israel?
As far as my training goes, I spend a lot of time in Tel Aviv at Hadar Yosef, and I spend between 2 to 3 hours out on the track doing my training, preparing myself for European Championships mainly.
And also outside Israel?
Also outside Israel, I did about 6 months in the U.S. training with my coach, primarily preparing me for the outdoor season.
Many Israeli athletes complain that they don't get enough resources here.
Yeah, that was one of the issues I thought about when I started training and when I came to Israel, was how competitive can I be if I don't have enough resources to compete with the best. So this was the best option for me, to spend half of my time in the U.S. and half of my time in Israel.
Okay. You grew up on the West Coast in America?
Yeah.
What brought you here to Israel?
Well, I had a chance to meet my wife now when we were teenagers. When I was 18 years old, I met her.
Oh.
And we were in school together. And
now it becomes interesting.
Yeah, it's always a story.
And she's an athlete as well?
Yeah, basketball player.
Basketball player.
Yeah.
Where did you meet?
We met at a school, Central Arizona College, where I spent 2 years there. She spent 2 years there before transferring to a different school. But those 2 years were great, and we became really good friends. It was amazing.
Wow, and now you live in a kibbutz. You're a kibbutznik in Israel.
Yeah, man, kibbutz and shemer.
And shemer. What do? You milk cows?
Well, cows are milked there, definitely. We have a lot of stuff that you can do in that kibbutz. It's really good for the kids, especially with all the animals. So it's really nice.
But tough times now in Israel. From somebody who comes from the outside, how do you cope with that?
My family's done a good job of just, explaining to me how things work and just how it could be different coming from the U.S. coming to Israel and experiencing what we're experiencing right now. It's not easy. It's not easy, especially with training. You hear an alarm. You always worry about your family and things like that. But I think we have one of the best armies in the world, the best. We have to, and I think they're doing a good job of protecting us, the soldiers. So that makes me sleep a little bit more easier at night.
All right, great. What's next for you, the Olympics?
We got 2 more years for the Olympics in Rio. Next year there'll be a World Championship in Beijing, and next month I'll be competing in Morocco, representing Europe in the Continental Cup. So I'm looking forward to that as the first Israeli to ever do it. So I'm really excited.
Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Donald, for coming. And this has been The World This Week. We'll see you here next Sunday. Have a great week. See you.